You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
You're listening to the Show Jumping Podcast, a fun and informative show for riders, owners, trainers, grooms, and fans of all levels.
I'm Christy McCormick from Saratoga Springs, New York.
And I'm Kimmy Carlson in St. Louis, Missouri.
And you're listening to the Show Jumping Podcast, where we talk about everything show jumping, from riding your horse in your backyard to, for today's topic, riding in the Olympics. Before we get to today's guests, a quick word from our sponsor.
Relyne GI is a natural, long-term alternative that goes beyond masking symptoms. This unique blend of gut-friendly hyaluronan and wellness-boosting beta-glucan works with your horse's body to soothe and protect their digestive system. Unlike traditional therapies that can disrupt digestion and nutrient absorption, Relyne GI leaves your horse's natural balance intact. But don't take our word for it. Relyne GI is field tested by leading veterinarians and backed by peer-reviewed research, including a study by Dr. Nathan Slovis, showing it effectively reduces gastric ulcers in active horses. Plus, it's Clean Sport certified and safe for competition use. Head over to resolvet.com. That's RESOLVET.com and use code SJP at checkout for 10% off, linked in our show notes.
On today's show, we are joined by Stevie Macken, son of Olympic rider Eddie Macken, who is going to take us through some fun insights on how the Olympics are working and what he thinks of the team format as it happens this year. Welcome, Stevie. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
For our listeners, could you give us a quick bio and how you've had any Olympic experience in your life?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Ireland in a very horsey family. My dad obviously competed at the top levels of the sport when I was a kid. My mother's side of the family were heavily involved in the eventing, and they've had horses competing at Olympic level in that discipline as well. So both sides of my family have a history in different varieties of the equestrian sports at Olympic level. I myself went to the Rio Olympics as coach and chef de keep of the Australian Olympic team, which was an amazing experience. I've been to a number of Olympics to watch my father compete. My father was also coach and chef de keep of the Irish team at the Athens Olympics. So I suppose I also had an event horse competing at this Olympics that I bred.
Oh, wow.
So the Olympics have been a big part of our family history over the last number of years, and always something that we've aspired to and really enjoyed.
And what do you think of this year's Olympics, how that's going? We just finished with the team format. The USA, brought the silver home. How do you think that went for this year?
I thought it was spectacular, to be honest. I loved the new format. I think that the sport was really in need of a little bit more of a condensed version of what we know and love. And I think what they've achieved with the new Olympic format, obviously starting last Olympics and continuing into this year, is something that even for non-horse people is a very exciting and dynamic new experience for all of us. I think the level of riding and horsemanship was outstanding. And I loved every minute of it, to be honest.
Yeah, it was really, I got to watch it yesterday and it was lovely to watch. I was curious because the time allowed for the team final was very tight. And that seemed to be a huge factor for the way everyone rode the course. So what is your take on having a really tight time allowed sort of as a course setting tool? And how do you plan differently when that happens?
So I think the way the sport's gone in the last 15, 20 years has always been this direction. Horses now are more agile. The courses they're jumping week in, week out are more towards the Olympic level of the sport. And by using the time allowed as a big part of the course builder's toolbox, I think it enables them to really give the top riders an advantage, which is what we're looking for at the end of the day in the sport. If you give people long enough to jump around the big course fences, they'll find a way to do it. Whereas if you put them under pressure, that's when the real fine skills of those top jockeys come to the fore. And I think if you look at the team final that we just witnessed, if you look at the round one riders, whom many of the top riders of the world were in that first group, they struggled with the time. And then you got to the anchor riders. And by the time the anchor riders came in, you could see they'd had time to study, understand, and really use their skill set to set them apart from perhaps the slightly lesser skilled and lesser talented riders. And at the end of the day, when you're jumping for medals, I think it's important that it's the people with the real skills that shine. The horses are obviously a huge part of it, but without the riders, it's the combination that we're looking for. So I think the time allowed is a very, very useful part of that.
Can you talk about how the format that you referenced that's new, second Olympics, as well as how it works with the anchor rider for some of our listeners that might be a little less familiar with the team format, and even adding in, the idea of the alternate. I know that the US needed to use our alternate, and I think didn't Great Britain have to also, with just the 3 riders that have to jump? Can you talk about how that works as far as strategy goes?
Yeah, so it's interesting now. So obviously each team turns up with 4 riders now, only 3 of which compete. In the old days,
right,
all 4 riders would compete and they drop a score, which is still the case in our normal Nations Cups. Although that's changing and evolving as we speak too. The EEF Nations Cup League has changed and there's a few things that are changing in the second round, which is making the sport more interesting. But going back to the Olympics, the 3-rider format means that you have no drop score. Every score counts. So pressure-wise, obviously that's magnifies the pressure you're under. Yesterday at the games, or yesterday's whatever day it was, Friday at the games for the team final, which I thought was very, very clever. Before the final rider rotation, they had a 20-minute break and they reversed the teams. In other words, the leading team, Great Britain, went last, which I think also was important and adds to the drama. You want the last rider in the ring to be the one jumping for that gold medal. And I think that was a very, very clever way of doing it. As far as the alternate goes, the alternate was picked by every country in a slightly different way. Most countries named the alternate as a reserve, i.e. Carl Cook. And, Carl obviously got the nod a couple of hours before, for whatever reasons. I'm not exactly sure what happened with Kent's horse. It's, it gives the chef to keep that job. It makes it a lot more interesting. It's the politics involved in picking your team, being able to bring an alternate in at the last minute and not having them, I suppose, for lack of a better verse, crack under the pressure, having them mentally prepared, all these things are part of the sort of way you prepare for a championship, and making sure that the alternate is included in the team and feeling part of the team, I think is very evident when they have to come in and do what Carl did and jump 2 clear rounds. It's, horses injure themselves, riders injure themselves, things change in our sport all the time. So I think that alternate spot is a very, very important piece of the puzzle. You're not just bringing someone to stand on the sidelines. There's a very good chance they're going to actually have to compete and then deliver on the day to win that medal.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You talked about the role of the chef to keep at the Olympics. Kind of the question is, when does that role start in the year before the Olympics, kind of in the selection process? And then what does that selection process for the team itself kind of look like? I know it's different country to country, but from your experience with the teams you've worked with.
So no, I mean, normally these chef to keep contracts are sort of 2 to 4 years. 4 years being the ideal scenario. A lot of them are 2 years because that encompasses the World Championships and then 2 years later the Olympic Games. Especially for the larger countries. So, you have a couple of years to get to know your athletes, both horse and rider, understand the combinations, view them at the top level shows. Each country has different specifications for the selection. When I was doing it for Australia, we had a board of selectors in Australia and myself. I was heavily involved in the selection process because I probably saw more of the horse rider combinations than the guys back in Oz did, but they came over and viewed the trials, and we went through that process, which used to be a little bit more the American way. I think in the US now they sort of dropped the trial scenario and they're running more off results based, which is probably I think a fairer way of doing it. These days we have so much showing going on that to add events just because of an Olympic cycle, I think is a little bit unfair on the horse rider combinations. There's plenty of jumping to see the horses and riders competing at a high level to be able to pick your team, it boils down to a couple of different things. Obviously, the ability of the horse and rider is a huge part of it. Past results, obviously a massive part of it. But then also understanding who's going to actually be able to step up to the plate and deliver on the biggest stage in the world. Because the pressure involved, as we all realize, if we've competed in this sport, and you ride into a ring on the Sunday afternoon for a Grand Prix of any level, whether it be an low amateur classic or a $100,000 FEI Grand Prix, things change, pressure builds up, and some people obviously deliver under that pressure and some people don't. And a lot of that's down to experience, but it's no different for the top riders. And you look at McLean Ward, Scott Brash, those anchor riders that rode those last rounds for the teams. Mm-hmm. Those guys are so good. They've ice in their veins. And, as a chef to keep, you're really looking for somebody and a partnership that's going to deliver for you on the day. So I think as far as selection goes, you're constantly watching and hoping that your best partnerships stay healthy, because obviously that's not always the case. And then you're trying to gel something that's going to, come to fruition at the right time. I think the Americans are a perfect example of that this year. They had a very quiet summer in the Nations Cup series. I think by anyone's admission, I think they probably were disappointed by how things went this summer. But towards the end of the summer, you could just see things were coming right. Form was there. And they got the Olympics. And on the day they were, silver medal. I think they would have been delighted with that going into it.
And when you were chef to keep, did you feel a lot of pressure yourself in, making those selections?
So when I was involved, it was slightly different. I worked with the Australians. I went to the World Championships in Cannes and then to the Olympic Games in Rio. And Australia is a smaller country and doesn't have the strength and depth of some of the bigger countries. Not to say there wasn't a selection process involved, but it was pretty evident who was at a level to compete and who was going to go. So we didn't have any big choices to make realistically. I think when you get to the bigger countries and you're looking at Robert Ridland and what he's done with the US, in many ways, it seems to happen in the same way, strangely enough. It's not, last man standing is maybe a little bit of a wrong phrase to use, but by the time you get to the Olympic deadline, it's rare that you have more than 4 combinations that are showing themselves. I think this year, the 4 that were picked were pretty clear. In the months and weeks leading up to it, that wouldn't have been as obvious as it was at the end. But funnily enough, even for the bigger countries, a lot of the time for the Olympics, because you really are dealing with that pinnacle of the sport, the teams almost pick themselves. When it comes to that, obviously difficult decision where you have to make a decision based on, what you believe in, I think a lot of it, in my experience, for the Olympics comes down to the ability of the rider. If you've got a choice to make between a lesser experience combination and you've got a rider that's been there and done it for you, I think as a chef to keep, you're probably more likely to go with experience if that's, a choice that you have to make. Just because, as I mentioned before, the pressure these guys are under when they get there it's just a different ball game. It's not your normal worship.
And how do you balance in maybe a bigger country like the US? What kind of would be the balance there between an experienced rider who's maybe been to the Olympics a few times and a lesser experienced team that shows maybe a ton of promise for the future, when to maybe give them the opportunity to go if it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of another between those two teams?
Well, I think you're always looking at the management behind everybody, I think if you look at the last number of US teams, whether it be Olympic or World Championship teams, that you probably have them bookended by 2 very, very experienced riders, maybe 3 if it's the format where the old 4 used to jump, and 1 lesser experienced rider. I'm thinking of Jesse in the last games, obviously Carl in this games, Adrian at the World Championships. These are all riders that hadn't had the experience, but, had in their own rights, had amazing success and deserved to be there. But also not just that, they had teams behind them that, gave them the street cred, if you want, and ability to perform at that level. It's, the flash in the pan doesn't really happen at Olympic level. Now, every now and again it does, but basically the work that goes into getting yourself to that level, it requires, a lot of training, a lot of management, a lot of good people around you. So the horse rider combination is one part of it, but the team behind that horse rider combination, especially when they're less experienced, is massive. I mean, if you look at Carl this year, I mean, he's got Eric Nave behind him, who is one of the greatest horsemen of his generation. If you look at Jessie last year, I mean, she had Nick and Laura, Helena Storm, and all these great people behind her. If you go back to, previous lesser experienced riders, they all rode with top professionals and were in programs that a chef to keep could look at and say, okay, these guys have it. This they'll be ready on the day. So I think that's a big part of it.
That it's not just this one sitting on there, who are talented riders, but I think that's cool to be able to rely on the people on the ground. And I mean, we all know what a team it takes to get anywhere, to any horse show. That just must be such a huge amount of that level of experience must give the chef a lot more confidence when he's selecting that kind of rider. What's it like at the Olympics themselves? What's the experience like? Obviously, each Olympics is different as far as location, and I'm sure, environment and teams and all of that. But can you talk a little bit about how that event is different than going to, a regular horse show that you might see either in Europe or in the States?
So I think the prime difference between the Olympics and any other top event, whether it be a World Championships, a Pan American Games, the European Championships, or even your Spruce Meadows or your Aachen, is as a kid growing up, dreaming of any sporting endeavor, the Olympics is the pinnacle. It doesn't matter whether you're running around the garden, on your pony or in your pool or playing tennis. The top of every sport is the Olympic Games. So it comes around once every 4 years. It's what immortalizes you in the sport. It gives you credit outside of your sport. You win an Olympic gold medal in show jumping, people will recognize you for years to come. It's a legacy-based, dream that really isn't possible to achieve in any other sphere of any other sport, let alone our sport. So when you get to the Olympics, you're as an athlete, or in my case, it was purely as a coach, and I was viewing the athletes. There's a level of focus that just isn't really necessarily there. Not to say that the riders aren't focused at the top shows, because obviously they are, but this is a once in a lifetime dream that they have an opportunity to really do something incredibly special. And you can feel that when you're there. The grooms, the trainers, everybody is super focused on that one animal that, for that 1 week. Years of work and effort have gone into it. It's interesting to see how different people do in that environment. Some people are very comfortable in it. Some people are very uncomfortable in it. So, I mean, that's obviously, I think, in every sport, the same thing. As far as, sort of looking in from the outside at sort of how things are different. When I was in Rio, we all stayed in the Olympic Village, which was pretty incredible. So you got to meet other athletes, you got to see the other athletes, you got to be part of other sports.
That's cool.
Obviously, then you really feel you're part of the Olympic movement. I think this year, because it was in Versailles, it was perhaps slightly different for the athletes. They didn't get to stay in the Olympic Village, which I'm sure was a little bit of a pity. When they separate the equestrian events, that's probably the biggest downside to it. But yeah, that feeling of camaraderie that happens in Olympic Games through that team that sort of surrounds you. You've got your own people, but then you've got the chef to keep. You've got the grooms, you've got the vets, you've got the physios, you've got this sort of mechanism that each country brings in order to try and strive and achieve for success. It's just different. It's bigger. It's more professional. It's there's the money behind it is more. There's funding for it. So it's a very, very special week for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing experience just to be a part of it, being able to interact with, just both the athletes and, as we mentioned, the teams behind those athletes that are just at that level, the highest levels of their sports. It's got to be just a really, really fantastic experience to be a part of. I This is a little more of an open-ended question, but do you have from any of your kind of Olympic experiences kind of a favorite moment that you come back to, and then maybe a least favorite moment? I'll leave that one as an optional one for you that you would like to share.
So my first Olympic experience was probably one of my favorite. And this is just a very, very selfish and personal one, but I went to the Barcelona Olympics. Can't even remember how young I was, but I was very young. It was the first Olympics that my dad had been able to compete at, because before that, there being a ban on professional athletes. Actually, I think he was allowed to compete in Seoul, but anyway, there was a ban on professional athletes for years, and he'd been a professional his whole life. So it was the first time we got to go and experience that Olympic spirit. Being there and seeing just the size of the fences and the event itself was very inspiring. But for me, my most memorable Olympic moment was that year, and I barely remember it, which is a weird way to answer a question. But Luca Beerbaum, I want to say he fell off, or he had a disastrous round in the team class, and then he came back and won the gold in the individual. And I thought that was just
wow.
So cool.
Did he? I didn't know
I
that.
think
That's amazing.
It just said so much about our sport, how, you can be at the bottom one day and at the top the next. And I remember being there and sort of thinking that was pretty cool. But, running from there onwards, Nick winning the medal in the gold medal, individual medal in Rio, I thought was pretty spectacular. That his horse had been injured basically he'd won the gold medal on the team in London, and then he'd had 4 years where he was in and out and never really sound.
Yeah.
And then the horse came good, and Nick being Nick went and delivered on the day, and understanding what went into that, getting the horse there, having him in that unbelievable form, the horse being that horse that he was, the world beater and deserving to be an Olympic gold medalist, not just a team but individual, and for Nick, his last ever event. I thought that was pretty cool. But then moving forward to this year, watching Scott ride that last round, Scott's a great friend of mine, someone who I know well and respect from every different level, not just as a rider. He's just a great guy, and to see him go in there and deliver under that pressure was just spectacular. And I think you'd have to say the same for McLean, but jumping for gold is jumping for gold. So watching those two guys do what they did this time round was as good as I've ever seen.
You watching those two go last, just the level of professionalism and the quality of just the calm and cool, and we're going to take care of the time allowed in the first 3 turns, and then we're just going to ride this course like it's a 3'3", little schooling course. It was really, really cool to watch.
Yeah, they gave a riding lesson. And I think you're right, Stevie, with any of those, watching them with their experience of having to ride under that pressure, they make the time allowed look like it's not an issue. They make the jumps look like they're smaller. They just are so neat and tidy with everything they do. It does give you that feeling when you're watching it, like, wow, this really is the best of the best. That must be really amazing to see it in person as well. So we all know that we all love, if we start riding as a little kid, like you said, the Olympics are sort of the thing you look up to. This is a really open-ended question. What does it take to get there? And I don't mean like, can you go through every single step, but does it really about the luck you get on the horse, do you think? Does it really about hard work? What do you think is one of the things that really makes, even for your father, how did he get to the Olympics and really keep that kind of energy and level of skill of his riding up for that?
The sport's probably changed a lot in the last couple of decades. My dad's career was a while ago, but I think the one thing that hasn't changed is just the work you have to put into it.
Yeah.
No matter how skilled you are, our sport, and I think the sport has now become an industry as much as the sport, has so many different facets that all need to be taken care of. You've got to be skilled enough as a rider. You've got to be dedicated enough as an athlete. You've got to find your partner in the horse that has the capabilities. You need to have a training program that works in the right direction. You need to have the sponsors and the owners and the people behind you. You need the right grooms, the vets. In order to build a platform for Olympic success, there are so many different dynamics that go into it that you can't achieve on your own. And I think the people that realize that are humble enough to seek help and listen to people around them, and obviously, have the ability, which at the end of the day is a huge component in this. those are the people that go on to actually achieve, the success and get to that level of the sport. Because without that sort of organization, without that mindset that it's not just you and your horse, you can't achieve it. You have to look at the bigger picture. You have to be able to give yourself the platform, whether it be financial, whether it be training, whether it be, there's so many different ways to be successful in our business and our sport, but you have to be able to manage lots and lots of different aspects of the industry in order to give yourself a chance to be on that sporting platform at the end of it.
And I think focusing on the riders and the teams behind them. Talk a little bit about more the horses specifically, and how would you go about, finding, say, we have somebody whose goal wants to go to the Olympics and they have the talent, and they have the other pieces. How do you go about finding that horse for a specific rider or more generally?
I think it always has to be specific, because I don't believe in generalizations. The only thing is, well, there's two ways to answer that question. You either, you buy young horses and you produce them yourself, which is always the best way to do it. If you have the program patience and ability to do that. But at the end of the day, a lot of people don't have either the time, the program, or the patience to produce a horse from the lower levels up. But making an Olympic horse, having that gifted young horse and being able to sort of, bring it on step by step is obviously the dream and the way that would probably give you the best chance at success. The partnership's formed over years. The trust is there. You understand each other's weaknesses. You can rely on each other, and that relationship that is found over time is something that I think most people would be more comfortable with. Then you've got the other side of the coin, which obviously is a big part of our business, is trying to find that horse when it's at the top of the sport and buy it for the Olympics. I mean, if you look at McLean this year, he purchased his horse just before the deadline, and obviously to huge success. That is different. Then you're looking for a horse that first and foremost has the ability. So what's the ability of an Olympic horse? They need to have the scope. We're not talking about jumping meter 50, meter 60. We're talking about jumping meter 65 these days at 400 meters a minute. So you need that natural ability that the horse has to have. It has to have a mindset, and it has to have the heart that wants to do it. And then the rideability of the horse has to suit the rider and the program that they're going to be putting that horse into, and that equation, between the chemistry that comes together between rider and horse. At the end of the day, you get the best horse in the world and you get the best rider in the world. If the chemistry is not quite right, you're not going to have the best partnership in the world. It's not as simple as that. So sure. You've got to look for horses and riders that are compatible. Some people need more blood, some people need less blood. Some people like a horse with more of its own mindset. Some people like to control a horse more. So there's so many different dynamics to go into selecting a horse to try and get to this level of the sport. But at the end of the day, the most important part of it is that the horse has the ability and wants to do it. These horses have to really love what they're doing. They love the sport and they really, really enjoy it. Those are the horses that'll thrive and go on to great things.
Yeah, I think about that so much now that I have stepped a little bit away from horse showing, and that what horses have I ridden or even taught or watched or watching the Olympics that really do show you they love their job and they love what they're doing, versus the ones that are kind of, forced into what they want, what not just what their ability is, but what their heart wants to do. And I think you can see that when you watch the horses jump around there. Do you have any, I'm assuming quite a few of the riders that were there this year or are there. Do you have any, has anybody called you with any stories, either good or bad, from across the pond over there?
No, I haven't heard much gossip yet. Normally that'll come out in the few weeks afterwards. People are so focused on what they're doing right now that, there's sort of, I'm sure there's things happening, but no, I heard a few things about the trot up. I think Andres Escaraga's horse didn't make the team trot up, unfortunately, but has made the individuals, which is great. Maybe a little bit unfortunate he didn't make the teams. That's sort of, there's again, I'm not sure what went down there. I'm interested to hear what happened with Gray and Kent. I'm not sure if we'll see them for the individual final, because obviously they'd be one of the strong favorites. No, as far as gossip goes, our world can be pretty salacious and fun at times. But to be honest, when you get to the Olympic Games, that's sort of not happening. Everyone is so focused and so dedicated to that week that it's not like a weekend in Florida or Spruce Meadows, or where you have all the socializing and the parties at night and all of that. That side of things doesn't really happen at the Olympics. The riders are cocooned off into their teams. Everyone's pretty separated, and for the week that they're there, the job's the job. So as far as the normal shenanigans that go on at a horse show, I would think there's very little of that going on.
Yeah.
Maybe time will tell, but I certainly haven't any information that would be fun to divulge.
Talking about the team psychology over there, do you think that once the team portion is over, do you think that carries on to, how people support each other in the individual, since that's the final that ends with, individual gold? Thinking about, again, like next year when I am imagining that everybody was behind him, just kind of rooting for him, even his own teammates who were participating in that were rooting for him as well. Does that feeling carry over towards the individual final?
I think it definitely does. The thing that this new format has brought in is that chef d'equipes can change the three for the individual, So I think until it's selected, there's probably going to be a little bit of tension in some of the camps, especially in maybe a few of the slightly lesser countries who, first three riders didn't go perfectly. Mm-hmm. The reserve rider sitting in the wings waiting to compete. And then the chef d'equipe, is the reserve rider going to be brought in? When's the reserve rider going to be brought in? Who's going to be dropped? Human nature, that's going to cause some tension. The Americans have a decision to make now. If Kent's horse is fit, they just won a silver medal.
Right.
Will any one of them want to bow out? Very unlikely. Should Kent jump? I mean, if looking at statistics, he probably has a higher chance of winning the individual final, maybe than any other of the three Americans, just on paper with his 5-star results this year. Maybe I'm wrong, but he's certainly, as far as someone to go in and win a 5-star, 6-star Grand Prix, I mean, Kent is super fast and super talented. So, that's that decision, until it's made, is probably going to bring some tension into the camp. I think once the decision's made, the disappointment will be quickly forgotten about, and everyone will jump on ship and really give the support that is deserved. But I think, that's definitely going to be a dynamic over the weekend, when that call's made and knowing who the three are going to be going forward.
That is a really interesting dynamic you brought up of both the teams that maybe didn't do so well in the team competition, and that calculus about whether or not to swap in an alternate, and so a team like the US that had brought in the alternate, and if Kent's horse is ready for the individual, that's a very different kind of calculus of how to make up that team.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to have to make that call.
One more question about that format. Is there ever, and maybe I don't know this from the previous format. So before we always had a drop score, but that always meant that all 4 riders could jump on the individual day. Is that correct? And we had a 5th alternate? No.
Yeah, no. Only 3 riders from each nation can jump.
Only 3. Okay. Yeah.
Which I think is fair. Otherwise, it'd just be too many people,
Too long and too challenging. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I mean, the chef d'equipe role, that's a hard call to make, but an important one. That's what they're there.
Well, and looking at what's best for the horses too. I mean, that's a lot of jumping rounds as well. And I would hope that, each element is kind of called into respect when they're trying to make those choices. So usually, like you said, it works out, it works itself out. But it seems to be by the end of the last round of the individual final, we're all sort of rooting for the leaderboard and someone bring home gold. So anyways, thank you, Stevie, so much for joining us today. Do you have any more insights on Olympics and how we can all work to get there if we'd like to?
No, I think this Olympics has been a wonderful advertisement for our sport. I really do. I mean, I live, eat, and breathe this sport. So for me, it's not just a business; it's a lifestyle, it's passion. It's sort of, it's been part of me forever. And to see the evolution of the sport, and to see, a lot of these guys are my friends, to see them competing at this level, and the venue in Versailles, the horse welfare side of things seems to be going off without a hitch. I mean, the course building has been brilliant. I think for our sport and for our business as a whole, I think it's in a really healthy place. And I'm really looking forward to Monday, Tuesday. I think it's going to be more of the same. And it looks like whoever's worthy is going to win it. He's not building to cater for anybody but the best athletes. So whoever wins that gold medal on Tuesday will have earned it. And it'll be fun to see.
Will have earned it. That's for sure. Well, and that hard work is what we all need to pay off in that for that result. So, well, let's all enjoy watching that. By the time this podcast is posted, those results will be up. So maybe Kimmy and I will do a follow-up on how that went for our next pod. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching it.
Yeah, same. All right, Stevie. Well, nice to chat with you. Thank you very much. And hopefully we can reconnect in the future.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
And now a quick word from Equine Network.
For first-time horse owners and new riders, finding the information and support you need can be challenging. That's why Equine Network has partnered with Sentinel and Absorbine to bring you My New Horse. From important horsekeeping information and how-to videos to social media communities, exclusive experiences, and more, My New Horse is your one-stop shop for riders of all levels and disciplines looking for easy-to-understand horse care information and guidance. Start your horse ownership journey today. Visit mynewhorse.com.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of the Show Jumping Podcast. Be sure to join our Facebook group, Overheard on the Show Jumping Podcast, and submit your questions there. Keep your eyes up and your heels down.